Welcome back to Natural AF. I'm your host, Isaac.
And I'm Alexa.
And this is a show all about reconnecting to nature and our natural state of being and what it means to be natural AF.
And speaking of natural AF, Isaac and I have both been sick during the week, so you may be able to hear we're a little bit nasally. We've had to do a couple of takes because I had a coughing fit. But we're here. We're feeling good. The irony of us being sick while we're doing the intro for this episode is that we actually kind of talked about our immune systems during this interview. But yeah, we're here. We're good. We're ready to go. We're so excited to launch this episode. This is our first interview that we're posting that we've done together. We finally released all of the interviews from the vault that Isaac had done a while back. So moving forward, all the guests that we'll have will be interviewing together, and we're so excited to have you hear them.
It's actually really nice having another mind to shape the conversation, and especially in this case, our guest in this episode, the unsinkable Meryl Dorey.
She is unsinkable. She is a warrior and a half, that woman. We love her. So she's a good family friend of ours. Yeah. My family's known Meryl for almost 30 years. She's an incredible human being, incredible woman. She's such a trailblazer in all that she's done. We actually only just touched on her personal story. Like, we could probably do a whole episode just talking about Meryl's personal journey and some of the stuff she's endured. Like, she's had media hit attacks on her. She's had death threats to her and her family. It's full on. For people that know Meryl, know what I'm talking about. A lot of it was very public. So she's such a trooper. We absolutely love her. She's an absolute wealth of information. So this really is an episode for anyone that's maybe questioning vaccination. This is a really good interview to listen to. And for those that sort of already know this stuff, it's just really good to know the stuff that we talk about in this episode is really good. Like, when people kind of say, but, vaccinations cured measles or whatever the mainstream narratives are, the stuff that we talk about is really foundational knowledge. So it's good stuff to know when you're talking to people about vaccines. And it might be a bit of a controversial episode, but to be honest, after the last 4 years, I don't think this interview is as controversial as it was 5 or 10 years ago. The conversation around vaccines has opened up a lot after what happened with the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. And I think it's opened a lot of people up to questioning vaccines at the very least. And we really, I guess this episode's really about getting people to just do your own research. Don't just blindly trust doctors, don't blindly trust politicians. Always do your own research and make your decision from you, not based on what anyone else is telling you.
And it's so vitally important because our children mean the world to us. They're the most important things in our lives. This whole past 4 years, if it's taught me anything, is that people will go through ridiculous lengths in order to avoid hurting someone else that they care about. At least that's what they'll tell themselves. But when it gets really down to it, the natural AF bare fundamental truth is that these things have an effect on the body that isn't always positive. That's a very big understatement. So I have my personal experiences. Alexa has hers. Meryl has her experiences. There's thousands of people probably that have come through the halls of AVN and have shared their stories, and there's a lot of voices that are growing louder and louder. And this is a point in our history, especially as Americans, is we just turned the corner after this last election process, where these conversations have been brought out to the world stage in a way that I don't think it's ever been done before.
No, I don't think so either. I've definitely not seen it in my lifetime like this.
Yeah, but it's so important that the truth is shared and that these stories get out and that we really examine the last 80, 100 years of science and medicine to see what's really been going on, because it's not all as it appears to be. And the story's been told by one side. The facts have been tilted. The scale has been altered and tampered with. And we're here to just add just our honest feedback and opinions and stories and experience, and also some truthful, beneficial, healthy ways forward to detox, to help. So it's not about fear. It's not about just mongering and just sharing negative things, but it's really empowering to know that there are things you can do if you've been vaccinated, if you vaccinated your kids recently. And also it's really as a parent, it's really good to know that there is a real scientific basis for your children's natural immunity, their natural resilience in the face of all these scary diseases that we're told are out there. And there's a lot of us out here that will stand with you if you're scared to take the step on your own. Maybe you're the first person in your family who's thinking of not vaccinating your children, and you've got all these people behind you on our side saying, you'll be okay. Your children will survive. They'll be okay. They have for thousands of years. And I'm a former medical professional. Meryl has the database of knowledge that exceeds every doctor probably on this topic with the amount that, because mother of 4 children, when your children's health is on the line, you're going to take rocks and give them and get knowledge out of stones if that's what it takes.
And I guess we really want to empower people. This is what we're all about at this podcast, is empowering people to really be who they're meant to be. And I don't believe that we're meant to be people that come into this world born perfect and have things injected into us the second we're born. Like, I don't believe that's how we're meant to live. Yeah. And if you do, that's fine. That's totally up to you. That's your decision. But I just don't believe that. And we didn't say, we didn't touch on this in the interview, but that's one of the biggest things too that never sat well with me, is that, for anyone that believes in God or source or creator, or like whatever put us here, why would we be created in perfection, in God's image, perfectly, and then need things injected into us the second we're born and be given medications at really young ages because we're unwell? Like, the reason that most babies are unwell is because they've been vaccinated at birth. Yeah. I think it really does speak to, I guess, like that faith in God, and having that faith in God, and just knowing that these things are man-made and they are perpetuated by a narrative that is pushed by man. This is not anything that is of God in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, and hopefully in the future, speaking out about it, it's just going to be more and more commonplace to just be like, vaccines, like, why would you do that? Yeah. and if you're like where I was, 3 or 4 years ago, and that sounds like a really extreme way to be, that's fine. Like, it's like, overall, I'm pretty good. I'm fine. I've had all my childhood vaccines. I got vaccinated in the Army. I've had injuries from it, sort of. I guess you'd call them injuries, but I talked about it in this episode. But it's survivable, and you can detox, and you'll be fine too. But I just don't like being lied to and sold a bill of goods because somebody wants to guarantee profits for life. Basically. Like, no, I'm more about, building our, well-being, building the wealth of our family and in the people that we're interested, people that we care about. Yeah. And at the end of the day, like, that's really just another mechanism, the medical industry, pharmaceutical industry. It's just another mechanism for us to hand over our power to someone else and something else that's nowhere near as powerful as we are, but they form the illusion that they are. Yeah. So, if you want to support the show, we appreciate you guys for doing that. We have had so many amazing customers over the past year or so, and a lot of amazing feedback. If you've seen our website, naturalartform.com, you can go there and support the show through our business, Natural Art Form. And we're also getting ready to launch our Black Friday sale, so keep an eye out for that. That's coming very, very soon. If you don't want to miss out, head to the website and subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you won't miss out when that launches. So without further ado, guys, let's get into the episode.
Meryl Dorey moved from New York to Australia 34 years ago to start a life with her husband, who is a macadamia farmer. They have 4 children together, the eldest of whom reacted to the DTP vaccine at the age of 2 months old, and again to the MMR vaccine at 18 months old. These events led Meryl to begin researching the subject, not an easy task before access to the internet became the norm. 5 years later, after meeting dozens of other parents whose children had been harmed or killed by vaccines, Meryl started what's now known as the Australian Vaccination-risks Network, or AVN for short. From the beginning, its mission has been to support health freedom and the basic human right to decide what does or does not go into our own bodies or the bodies of our children. This volunteer-run group of parents and health practitioners lobbied for and got legislation passed that would give parents the right to conscientious objection to vaccination without facing discrimination or financial penalties. This was overturned in 2016 with the introduction of the no jab, no pay, and a short time later, no jab, no play policies. Nonetheless, the AVN has continued doing its work and this year celebrated its 30-year anniversary. Meryl has recently retired from her role at the AVN and has since been focusing on her show Under the Wire and writing articles on her Informed Choice Substack. Welcome, Meryl.
Yay!
Thank you so much. Good to see you both, Alexa and Isaac. Great to see you.
Thanks so much for coming on. I'm so excited to have this chat with you because, I mean, you're just such a pioneer, first and foremost, and we were both at the 30th anniversary, and to just hear all of the trials and tribulations, not only that the AVN has been through as a group, but you personally, like you've really been through the ringer over the years doing this work. So yeah, we really are so excited to, let more people know about this because, I mean, especially over in the States, you've done most of your work here in Australia, even though you're also from the US. A lot of people over there don't know about you, apart from the other groups that the AVN's involved in. We want to get your name out there and tell your story.
Well, they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I must be incredibly powerful now.
Absolutely. So we always like to kick this off with our first-time guests, just to open up the floor for you, really, and just share a bit about your background, maybe a little bit about how you grew up, and then just the most significant life events that you experienced that led you to do the work that you did and led you to where you are today.
Yeah, it's funny. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, as you can probably tell from my accent. And my husband still loves the way I say coffee.
Coffee.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But I grew up in a very mainstream family. I remember well my mother taking me to the doctor every time I had a cold, and the doctor would give me an injection of antibiotics because that's what they did back then. And, everything was medical. The doctors were God, and you never question God, so you don't question the doctor either. And that's what I grew up with. And I never really questioned anything. I remember my grandmother developed bone cancer when I was in my 20s, and she was in terrible, terrible pain. And in the hospital, they used her as a guinea pig. Offers some new treatment that was being used, and it made her pain worse, and it eventually killed her. And I remember thinking at the time, this can't be right, but it was sort of stored in my memory bank. And then when I moved to Australia and I started having my children, my first child, I never questioned vaccination, never questioned anything. He was given the vitamin K, like he had a terrible birth and he didn't breathe for his first 5 minutes. His APGAR score was 2 out of 10, which is really low. And, we're lucky that he survived that. And he got a vitamin K shot immediately after they revived him. And I never thought twice about it. And then I took him in at 2 months for his vaccine. Again, never thinking twice about it. I had the blue book that they give out in New South Wales. It's like a book that you use to keep track of your children's health progress. And his blue book said, take him in at 2 months. So I took him in at 2 months. And I guess for a significant event, what happened after that was pretty significant. Because because his birth was so bad. He was one of these very floppy babies. I had to wake him up to feed him. He would never wake up to feed. He was very limp and not well at all. He was not gaining weight. I took him 3 times a week to the baby health center to get weighed. And I thought everyone did that. He was my first child. I had no one to compare him to. And they would weigh him 3 times a week, and he was putting on like 10 grams here and 5 grams there, and sometimes he would be losing weight. So when I took him in for his vaccine, this baby who really never cried, never did anything, about 2 hours later, he started this high-pitched, horrendous scream that I'd never heard any baby give, and he didn't stop. And I didn't know anything about this, and I contacted the doctor's office, and I was just told to give him Panadol, and I did. And I took him back he eventually settled, but I took him back for his 4-month shot, and the doctor actually asked me, how did he go after that first shot? And I said, well, it's funny you should ask, because this is what happened. And I told him, and he said, oh, we might leave the whooping cough portion out of this vaccine. And alarm bells started going off in my head. And I was like, oh, okay. And I got him the DT and the polio. And back then, the polio was an oral vaccine. It was different than what they do now. And he didn't react immediately, but he had failure to thrive, which basically means that aside from breast milk, he wasn't interested in anything, and he was still very floppy, very sleepy. And again, I had no one to compare him to, but that sort of started me trying to research. And I say trying because back then we didn't have the internet. We didn't have access to anything. I would go to bookstores and libraries, and there was nothing on vaccination. And then a friend of mine in the U.S. who actually published a parenting magazine, and she was pro-vaccine, she said, I've just read about this book, DPT, A Shot in the Dark by Harris Coulter, and I think you should get a copy of it. And I got it, and my mind was blown, absolutely blown, because there was all this information in there, children who reacted exactly like my son had reacted, and children who died. And I had never been told any of this. And I found out, just as an aside, maybe 8 years later, after my doctor who gave my son the vaccine had moved away, I found out from his wife that he had never vaccinated his own children. He had 4 children, and they were unvaccinated. And it's a good thing that that man was not here, because I might have been arrested if he had been.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to give children a vaccine thinking you're doing the right thing, but if you hadn't even subjected your own children to it and you knew that it was dangerous, giving it to someone else's child is just beyond the pale.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually surprising, like, how many doctors, obviously it's always off the record when they tell people, but it's actually, I think a lot of people would be surprised if they knew how many doctors don't vaccinate their own children because they know the risks.
Yes, and there have been surveys done over the years. One was done over 30 years ago, and it was totally anonymous, so the doctor didn't have to give their name. And in this survey, something like 60-something%, I can't remember because it's a while ago, but it was over 60%, so almost 2/3 of doctors said that they didn't vaccinate their own children. And
Wow.
I think doctors have a very high rate of suicide, from what I understand, and a very high rate of attrition also. A lot of doctors leave medicine, and you don't spend, in the U.S. hundreds of thousands of dollars and 8 years studying something only to leave it. And I think that a lot of it is because they can't live with the fact that they've done this. And I have seen interviews with good doctors who have suddenly realized that this is what they've been doing and they can't bear it. They just can't bear it. So the ones that are left there are either totally ignorant or totally immoral. And I have no doubt in my mind that that's the case, because how can you continue to harm people when you supposedly have taken an oath to firstly do no harm?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I've heard of doctors that have found out, or through their own line of questioning, realized that what they were doing wasn't even designed to keep people healthy or whatever the main story is, but it's actually designed literally to keep them sick. And there was one in particular, Dr. Jennifer Daniels, that when she found out about this and started leaving out the medical protocols and just giving people a choice to either do it or not, or try some natural routes, the pharmaceutical rep reported her to the authorities and she lost her license over that.
Yeah, that's a very common story, unfortunately. And, there are so many really good doctors in Australia, in the United States. There's the AMPS, the Australian Medical Professionals Society, I think it's called. And they are filled with doctors who are no longer able to practice drug-based chemical medicine. Instead, they're practicing health-based medicine. And I think that once enough people find out what has been going on, Western medicine as we know it is going to be gone. And I can't wait for that to happen. And that's not to say that there aren't doctors who are doing good things. Western medicine is fabulous for acute care. If I break a leg or I'm in a car accident, give me a doctor, a regular mainstream doctor. But I also want the hospital to have naturopaths and homeopaths to help with my healing afterwards. It shouldn't be an either or. It should be collaborative, and it should be everyone working together. And doctors need to know their limitations. And right now, I don't think they do. They think they're God too, in many cases. So and that's one thing I have to say about the whole COVID situation. Because COVID, when it happened 4 years ago now, and when the vaccine, the so-called vaccine, the genetic modification injection started 3.5 years ago, or however long it was, to February 2021 in Australia. When that first started, I think that the COVID situation did more to open the eyes of the general population than the AVN has done in 31 years, than the National Vaccine Information Center has done in nearly 40 years. And it's because they really and truly push things too far.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, you were positioned so well for that. I mean, in spite of the circumstances being as troubling as they were, you really had been a part of laying the groundwork so that people had somewhere to go to get information once they realized something was wrong. They didn't have to go through you remember the Dewey Decimal System at the library and try to find the right book. It's like, here we go. Like, you've been waving your hand and shouting for years at that point, decades.
And I think like the proliferation of the internet, I mean, and it's such a stark contrast to where you were 30 years ago researching and not, without the internet. And now it's like they can censor all they want on certain platforms, but there's so much information out there. And I think that's what really came out of COVID too, is like people starting podcasts, people starting, writing articles, these doctors coming together and forming groups so that people could find information and speaking out. And I just think that happened quite quickly too, that I just think there was no way that the medical industry could stop that from happening.
Absolutely. And I think that is what is behind the global push right now for legislation on so-called mis and disinformation that is happening in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, in New Zealand. It's that the governments have realized that they are no longer in control of the conversation. They no longer have the ability to tell people something and have them believe it. So they're terrified that they're losing control over people. So this mis and disinformation legislation is purely because people are finally waking up and getting their own information and doing their own research, which is what the Australian Vaccination Network and groups like us have been saying for decades. We're not telling you what to do, but we are saying that you are more than capable of understanding this information and making a decision for yourself.
Absolutely. I know they try to make it sound like, oh, you haven't become a doctor, so you have no credibility. It's like the studies are written in English, and with a little bit of work, you can learn some of the vocabulary and look up what they have. But you can discern it, and it doesn't take a medical degree to realize when something is making you ill, especially when you're a mother and you are intimately aware of everything about your baby, and when their behavior changes, when they're feeling sick and they're suffering, you know that immediately. You may not know why, and you don't have to know why. You don't have to know what molecule attached to what. Like, all that doesn't matter. It's just we want the children to be healthy and for doctors to listen to mothers.
And that's why so many, like mothers especially, but, parents get gaslit into this, into vaccinating their children because they turn it around like, you don't know anything. You don't have a science degree. You don't know what you're talking about. And, Isaac just hit the nail on the head. It doesn't matter. A mother's instinct is always right.
Absolutely. And that is one thing that I have to say. People may or may not know, but Australia has its own Vaxxed bus that we sort of worked with the American group to create. And one of the things, now I did not have this instinct, I have to say, and I don't know if it's because I was raised in New York where we were so out of touch with everything natural, but when we were on the Vaxxed bus, one of the things that we did was interview hundreds and hundreds of parents whose children had either been killed or injured by vaccines. And I would say 95% of them, and that's no joke, 95% of them said, I knew when I took my child in that it was the wrong thing to do. In the pit of my stomach, I knew that it was going to harm them, but I did it because the doctor said this was the only way to help them. And I think that ignoring those instincts is the worst thing that anyone can possibly do, and getting in touch with those instincts in your own body, which can take a long time for some people, myself included, is really important. And you know, that we as parents, there's a great book. It's very old, but I recommend everyone get a copy of it. It's called How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor by Dr. Robert Mendelsohn. Now, he was the head of a teaching hospital in Chicago. He was a pediatrician, and he said, if you want your child to be healthy, don't take them to the doctor. And that's what he actually said. And his book was all about how talk to your grandparents, your grandmothers, ask them how they treated things, make chicken soup, put them to bed, give them fluids, all of these things. Don't take them to a doctor unless they're bleeding to death or they've been in a car accident. That's it. Other than that, you can handle everything at home. And I think empowering parents is one of the most important things we can do, because as you said, Alexa, and you too, Isaac, the medical community has basically said that we are not medical professionals, so we shouldn't have an opinion on our own children when we are the experts on our own children. And no doctor, no health professional will ever know what we know about them. So, yeah, don't be afraid.
Yeah, well, and I saw firsthand, I don't know if you know this, but I was in the Army, I was training as a special operations combat medic. And our training was a bit more intensive than the normal combat medics because we actually trained in the hospitals. And at some point, actually, we're sitting in on surgeries and helping with open heart surgery and putting in chest tubes and all this intense stuff. And I saw firsthand, it was a training hospital, and I saw doctors make some really basic mistakes. They're underslept, they're overworked, and they're put in a situation where people's lives are at stake, but they're not set up for success. And we would go around and we would correct some of these mistakes because we have all this stuff fresh in our minds. And, so we're adjusting little things and questioning, kind of using political correctness ways to question the doctor politely and be like, should we give this drug at this amount? Because, it's a bit much, but we're still trained in all that stuff and thinking that that's like the standard of care. But when I started the training, the first thing they told us was this quote, I think it was from Hippocrates, about let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And they told us about the old ways of doing things, how doctors would take, like for diabetes, they would diagnose it by taste from someone's urine, and these old methods that are like way outdated, but it was back then, I don't think there was that much. I really don't think there was that much difference in the death rate, but it was, I don't know. It was just obvious that what they were doing in the hospitals, we knew that a certain amount of people would die from mistakes from medical professionals. And now I think it's like one of the top 3 killers.
In the U.S., it's number 3. On the level of killing. I think heart disease and cancer are the only two that kill more Americans than doctors. And that is an old figure, and that didn't include the fact that heart disease and cancer is caused very often by vaccines and drugs. So I believe that medicine is the number 1 killer of people. And it's interesting because we had the curriculum for New South Wales, University of New South Wales Medical School, which is one of the top medical schools in the country. And In 4 years of medical school, doctors study vaccines for less than a half a day. And the curriculum is written by the pharmaceutical industry that makes the
Absolutely.
vaccines. And it doesn't teach them anything about the diseases the vaccines are meant to prevent or any side effects or potential problems or contraindications. The only
Wow.
thing it teaches them is, and this is old, so at that time there were only a few vaccines that were given, but it says, at 2, 4, and 6 months you give these vaccines, at 12 months you give these vaccines, and at 18 months you give these vaccines. You administer them in this location, you make sure that you draw them up and make sure there's no bubbles in the vial. And that was all it said. So doctors, when it comes down to it, and I've said this for a long time, a mother or a father who does a few hours of reading in the medical literature will know more about this subject than even a specialist, because they are only taught what the pharmaceutical companies want them to know. And the doctors who actually go out and do their own research stop vaccinating because
Yeah.
they know how harmful it is.
Yeah. That's so wild hearing that small number. But I believe it because a lot of the stuff that we missed that I'm learning about how important it is, like the lymphatic system, we barely even touched on the lymphatic system and detoxification in my medical training. And we went through the first, it sounds unbelievable, but 2 years of medical school training in 6 weeks. That was our basic training for medical stuff to bring you up to speed and then start doing, work with, other things. But
Wow.
yeah, about a blip about vaccines. Basically, all they tell you is it was Pascal or whoever was the guy that
Pasteur.
Louis
Oh,
Pasteur.
yeah.
And that old story, it's the same story they're still telling today. Like, that's how vaccination works. They don't tell you about all the different adjuvants and all the different fetal
ingredients.
cells. And
Yeah.
they don't get into any of that. So,
Well, and in my training, I studied holistic nutrition at a college of natural health and, learned all the natural stuff, but we had to learn pharmacology was one of the subjects because you have to know all the, the interactions with nutrients and for the naturopaths, they have to know the the interactions with herbs. And we did a whole lecture on vaccination and how great it was. And I will never forget that lecture because you could have heard a pin drop. Like, it was a college of natural health. So my best guess is that most people sitting in that room totally disagreed. And I look back now and I wish, because this was, I think 7, 8 years ago now. I look back and I'm like, I wish I knew. I mean, because obviously my background, Meryl, and I've shared this on our first podcast that, my mum obviously stopped vaccinating me at a young age because I had reactions and has never vaccinated my brother. So I knew like the basic stuff, but in a pharmacology lecture with, the lecturer had a master's in pharmacology. Like, I couldn't give her like stats. I think I probably could rattle some off now. And I look back now and I just think, I wish I spoke up and just said something because I think it would have made other people a bit more comfortable to question it, but no one did. We just sat and I think we were all kind of like, okay then. And since then, I've realized, like, looking back, like, we were taught about how we literally did a lecture where they explained what allopathic medicine was and how great it was. And I just look back now at all these little things throughout that course that were it made it very obvious that they are completely manipulated and controlled, even these colleges of natural health.
And they have to be, because if they don't say those things, they will lose any funding from the government. It might blow your mind a little bit to know that I used to go in every year to Southern Cross University. I'll name the lecturer because she's since passed away, sadly, but her name was Teenie Gruna, and she taught naturopathy. And every year she asked me to come in and take a class and teach them about vaccines. And
that's amazing.
she would have someone from the medical college at the university also come in at the same time, so they would get both sides, which is great. I think that's fantastic, and people could ask questions. But now there's only one side that's taught, and the government is tightly controlling this. Homeopathy can't be taught in Australia anymore. It is. Any health-based therapies are very much under threat in Australia and have been for a long time. And that is because the only way that allopathy can possibly maintain its supremacy is by making sure that nobody else has access to natural therapies as much as possible. So, I mean, Medicare should be covering all therapies so that people can make a choice. We're paying for it out of our tax dollars. Why can't we choose to go to a chiropractor, a naturopath, a homeopath, and have it refunded? The government would save so much money and people would live so much longer and so much better. But that's obviously not the goal.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's funny you say that. The college I studied at, the year that I think I started in 2017, they still offered the homeopathy course. By 2018, it was gone. And it was around, because when I started, I was studying nutrition and mum kept saying, you should do homeopathy. You know, we've used homeopathy our whole life. And I was like, I'm not interested. I did my first year and I was like, oh, this just opened up a whole new world for me. I was like, I'd love to do homeopathy. And then by 2018, they'd scrapped it. And when I was looking up, you cannot, unless you... I've seen a couple of places now that are like private training, but anywhere like a college, university, like wherever they used to be taught, I couldn't find anywhere in Australia that you could study homeopathy. And then around the same time was when they changed the private health insurance cover. So they stopped covering all natural therapies. And I remember writing into my local member at that time because I had just committed to a 4-year degree in a natural therapy, to be told that, oh, people can't claim that on private health insurance, which obviously deters people from using them.
Yes, and from my understanding, colleges of naturopathy and nutrition and chiropractic right now, they're requiring that the students be vaccinated in order to do their practical work. And there are ways around it. You can say that because practicum is only 2 weeks, I think, you can say that you'll wear a mask for the entire 2 weeks. And if you work in a private facility, you can do that. But if you work in a public facility, I think there's no way around it. And it sort of puts the lie to the idea that vaccines are effective, because if vaccines are effective, why should someone who's unvaccinated have to wear a mask? Aren't you protected if you've taken the vaccine? There's no logic in this at all.
Right.
There's only control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what would you say to somebody who's maybe there's a crack in the programming to where they're just like, but I wanted to be a doctor. I want to help people. I'm really, really smart. What would you say to kind of deter them or just open them up to really using their gift and not being placed into the control?
I recommend people not to study medicine, because everyone I know who studied medicine has come out of university brainwashed by the programming that they give there. You can go in there with the best of intentions, with the idea that you're going to help people, and you come out as an automaton, sadly. But if you are going to choose to do medicine, I would suggest moving to India and studying it there. And I'm not kidding. I think that India is one of the few countries where medicine is actually taught properly, and they study medicine, homeopathy, naturopathy, Ayurveda, all at the same time. And they come out fully rounded in health, not drugs, just health. China may be the same. I'm not sure. I don't know much about the Chinese system. I do know that before Mao, when China was still using traditional Chinese medicine, doctors were paid a stipend. So every family would pay their doctor or their community doctor a stipend. When they got sick, they stopped paying them. And that sort of put an incentive on the doctor to make sure that these people stayed well. And I think that if we had that system in the Western world, first of all, most doctors would not be doctors, but secondly, we would have no drugs and vaccines. So, I think that people are really starting to question. And if people, doctors, parents, health professionals, if they are asking questions about vaccines, what I would suggest, there are 3 very obvious questions that everyone should ask before they make a decision about whether they should or should not vaccinate. Number 1, is the vaccine safe? That's really important. And they should know that no vaccine has ever been gold standard studied. In other words, studied against an inert placebo, saline solution, water. It's never studied against those things. So we don't have science to show that vaccines are safe. is it effective? Again, we have never had the study performed on a broad scale to show that the unvaccinated are at more risk of anything than the vaccinated. And there have been some smaller studies that have shown the complete opposite. And is it necessary? And that is a really important question too, because we look at the diseases or the infections that vaccines are trying to prevent, things like measles, whooping cough, chicken pox. The vast majority of these infections were not considered dangerous for at least 60 or 70 years before the vaccine started to be used on the mass basis. That is not to say that nobody has ever died from measles in the last 50 years or whooping cough. It is to say that in the vast majority of cases, young, healthy children did not die from these illnesses. You can see that in the government graphs that are brought out. I'm happy to send you some of these graphs if you'd like to share them with your audience. And the fact is that vaccines have never been shown to prevent even one infection. The basis of vaccination, and what you would have learned, Isaac, and probably what you would have learned as well, Alexa, is that if you inject a small amount of a substance, whether it's a measles virus or a whooping cough bacteria, that's been chemically altered or attenuated into a person's body, it will train the immune system to recognize it as an invader. And the next time that body encounters that in the community as an infection, it will be alerted immediately, and the person will develop antibodies that will allow them to be protected against that without getting any symptoms. And that's a great theory. But in reality, we know, and we've known since the 1940s, that is not correct. There was a doctor who actually won a Nobel Prize for this in the 1940s. His name was Dr. Meryl Chase, spelled differently than me. And he showed that the antibody part of the immune system, which is the only part of the immune system that vaccines work with, is not the main part of protection against infectious illnesses. We have a whole range of other things, B cells, T cells, white blood cells, that all protect against infection, and they are non-specific, so it doesn't matter what you're exposed to, your immune system will be alerted and will protect you. And also, very important to know that antibodies, which is what vaccines are meant to produce, don't actually indicate that you are immune. So when a vaccine is injected into a test subject and what they do is they inject people with this vaccine and they go back days or weeks later and draw blood and say, well, their protective antibody level was X and that is better than what we expect, so therefore the vaccine worked. Antibodies do not indicate immunity. They only indicate exposure. So all it means is you've been exposed to something. You are not immune to it. And we know this because, I can just think of one study. In 1987, there was a study in Corpus Christi, Texas, of a university where everyone had recently been vaccinated against measles. And there was an outbreak of measles in this university. And what they had done is they vaccinated the young adults in the university, and they drew blood a few weeks later and said they were all serologically immune. So according to their blood, they should not have been susceptible to measles. And there was a huge outbreak of measles. 87% of the people who got measles had recently been vaccinated against it. So much for the claims the measles vaccine is 95% effective. It's not effective at all. And they basically said, we don't understand why this is happening, but we should continue vaccinating because it's the best thing we've got. The fact is, if you get measles as a child without being vaccinated, you will be protected for life from further measles infections. If you are vaccinated against measles, A, you can still get the measles infection. B, you can get it more than once because your immune system has been perverted. It's been altered so that you can never develop durable, true, natural immunity. So rather than being protective, it's actually counterproductive.
Yeah. Yeah, I can 100% agree.
And there are so many studies that show that. I've mentioned on here on our previous episode that I do social media management for the AVN, and the amount of, and again, that's why the amount of stuff being shared around now on social media and on the internet, there's so many studies that show the same thing. The same thing happened with polio, that all of these places that they started doing, injecting people with polio, they'd have all these outbreaks. And of course you've got the whole, because often people bring up, that's like the number one thing I would say that people bring up when they go, well, what about polio? They eradicated polio with the vaccine. And it's like, well, they kind of just rebranded it, which we saw with COVID. They just rebranded the flu, right? The flu cases just dropped off the face of the earth, and all of a sudden we had all these COVID cases. So that's a whole other ball of wax. But I actually wanted to, so just on that topic, so obviously people are questioning, there's things that they can look at, but for people, for parents in particular, or now we've seen it with COVID, but for people that have vaccinated their children or been vaccinated, even with flu vaccine or whatever in adulthood, what are some signs that people can look out for to indicate that their children or themselves have been vaccine injured?
Very good question. And interestingly, in Australia, there is a publication from the government that's meant for doctors. I can't for the life of me remember the name of it. I think it's Understanding Immunization, but I'm not sure. It's put out by the government. How dare you,
Meryl, not remember? She remembers everything, dates, studies, everything off the top of her head, and like the one thing she's like, I can't remember. It's
fine. and they used to publish a list of known side effects, and it was 31 or 32 side effects that were in there. They don't publish that anymore, so doctors don't even know what to look out for, because this is for doctors specifically. What I suggest parents do when they vaccinate their children or themselves is do a before and after diary. So look for things in a baby, because an infant can't really communicate. So if you're vaccinating a young infant, how many wet nappies are they getting, or diapers are they getting a day? How often are they feeding? How often are they sleeping, and how long are they sleeping? Are they crying a lot before they get the vaccine or after? So you want a comparison. So a pre-diary and a post-diary. Look for things like rashes that weren't there before. Eczema is a big one. And eczema is widespread in the vaccinated community. And after the development of the smallpox vaccine, eczema was first notified, and they called it eczema vaccinatum, which is eczema from the vaccine. So, it's been known for a long time and it used to be warned in the medical literature, never vaccinate someone who has an active case of eczema. Wait until it's finished, and then you can vaccinate them. So look for skin conditions, look for changes in feeding, changes in sleeping. Look for signs like head hitting. If they hit their head against the floor, loss of eye contact, that's another big one. I'm just trying to think. Those are in infants that you should look out for those things. And also floppiness, like my son had, where they just become limp, where before they were holding their head up and they were, doing things. If they become limp, that is a very serious side effect. It's a sign of a involvement in the brain. It's called a hypotonic hyperresponsive episode. So you need to look out for that. In an adult, all of the previous, and you might be less likely to realize that your eating habits have changed, or your toileting habits have changed. But look for things like that. Look for side effects like seizures, things like that. In a lot of the vaccines, and it's not just the COVID jab, there are heart conditions that can follow. So look for palpitations, changes in blood pressure, changes in your heart rate. People are finding very high heart rates, and POTS, which is positional orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I can't believe I remembered that.
Nice. You redeemed yourself.
That is where when you stand up, suddenly you can faint, or your blood pressure drops severely, and you find that you can't really sit up or stand up for long periods of time. There is such a wide range of side effects, and there are things that people don't normally associate with vaccines, like diabetes, and like asthma. Asthma is rampant in the vaccinated community, and study after study has shown up to 12 times increased risk of asthma in the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. And another graph that I will send you is a graph from Dr. Bob Sears in Oregon. He actually did his study in his own practice patients. Now, he's been a pediatrician for decades, and he's got, I think, something over 10,000 patients that he had studied in this instance. And in his unvaccinated patients, his partially vaccinated patients, and his fully vaccinated patients, he was able to show this enormous increase in a range. It might be like 30 or 40 different conditions he looked at. And, he was able to show that in the vaccinated and the partially vaccinated, these conditions were so much more common than in the unvaccinated. There's one other thing that I need to mention in infants, and that is sudden infant death syndrome, which was not even described until the 1960s. It was so rare there was no name for it. And then in the 1960s, which was when the vaccine schedule started in the United States, suddenly there was sudden infant death syndrome, and it became the most common cause of infant death. So things like sleep apnea, where a child stops breathing in their sleep. My son had that after his vaccine. And any change in breathing pattern should also be noted. And if you notice these things, this is the thing. Parents often notice these changes in their infants and children, and they go back to the doctor, and the doctor says that's perfectly normal. Well, it may be very common since we've been using vaccines, but it is not normal. It is a sign. The only way that your child has to communicate with you is through these symptoms. And if that happens, stop vaccinating. Don't keep going.
Right.
Because they accelerate. These reactions can accelerate. And with the first exposure, you may get these reactions, but second, third, fourth, your child may not survive. And I'm not saying that to scare people. I'm just saying it because I've spoken with so many families that this happened to.
Absolutely. And it's so obvious when you look at even without looking at researching, but just looking at the statistics as the schedule has increased the amount of vaccines that children are getting, the rates of autism have increased. It correlates. Another one, because, you were saying that, things that people don't associate, like diabetes and lots of autoimmune conditions, and allergies is another big one. So if you want to touch on that, because that's related to the ingredients that they use, right, that people are now developing. And again, we've seen the proliferation of food allergies, and like kids can't take a peanut butter sandwich to school anymore because every second kid's got a peanut allergy. And that's been linked to vaccines too, right?
It has, and there's a very biologically plausible reason for this to happen, but doctors don't know about this. There are ingredients in the vaccine. You mentioned peanuts. There has been peanut oil used as one of the adjuvants in the vaccines. Not all vaccines, but some vaccines. In Asia, because they don't really eat peanuts in a lot of places, they use sesame oil, and the same thing is happening with sesame allergies. When an adjuvant, or an adjuvant is basically an ingredient that's added to a vaccine to provoke an immune response. Because if you just inject the virus, nothing will happen. And this is something a lot of people don't know. The virus or the bacteria that's meant to be injected in the vaccine only makes up a tiny percentage of the vaccine, maybe 10% at the most. The rest of it is all these additives, fillers, everything, and they are quite toxic. So if you just inject someone with measles virus, generally nothing will happen. They won't have a reaction. But if you add an adjuvant, it's meant to alert the immune system, come here, look at this. So they attach, or they will find a way to attach the virus or the bacteria to something else that alerts the immune system. And generally that's an adjuvant. So it could be an oil, a lipid, something like that. It could be aluminium, which is used as an adjuvant in a lot of vaccines, which passes right through to the blood-brain barrier. It used to be mercury, does the same thing. And when the immune system is alerted, it sends its immune factors to that area. and it will see the virus, and it will see what it's attached to, and it will say enemy. So when it encounters that thing again, it will attack it. So it sees the peanut oil, and someone eats peanut butter, and the immune system says, this is an enemy, we're going to attack it, and that's going to cause an anaphylactic reaction, and it could kill them, or it could really seriously injure them. That's why you see kids not allowed to bring... When I went to school, for an entire year, I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every single day.
Like a true New Yorker.
Yeah, absolutely. I got so sick of it. But now kids can't bring peanut butter because even just eating a sandwich and breathing on something can provoke that response. So we have things in the vaccines that you don't know about. But there are a whole bunch of proteins that we normally encounter in our daily life. Eggs are used in a lot of vaccines. They're used in the rubella vaccine and the flu vaccine. So that's why egg allergies are rampant right now. Eggs used to be one of the first foods that parents would give their children. Now they're told not to give them eggs. If they're unvaccinated, you generally don't see these allergies. If they are, then you can. And since you brought up these sorts of allergies, autoimmunity is also a big problem. Arthritis. There are young children getting arthritis now. Children being treated with chemotherapy because they have arthritis and steroids. You know, they're being put on all these things to treat what was caused by the vaccine in the first place. And they're talking about creating vaccines for things like arthritis and MS, you know, multiple sclerosis, all of these things. And they're all caused by vaccines.
Yeah,
and that's not to say that they didn't exist at all beforehand, because definitely there was arthritis, definitely there were all sorts of autoimmune problems, there may have been asthma, but they were vanishingly rare. And now it's rare to find someone who doesn't have them. I first saw someone use a puffer when I was 26 or 27 on a skiing trip. And I'd never seen that before. And I said, what is that? And she said, oh, I've got asthma. This is a puffer. And I'm like, oh, that's really weird. I've never heard of that. Now, I mean... Everyone and their dog has puffers, literally.
Yeah.
I remember when I was at school and my friend had a puffer, and I actually thought, I was like, oh, I thought it made her special. And I was like, I want one of those. And I'm just like, no, no, I don't.
Well, I had reactions in the military that it didn't really occur to me until later, but boot camp is where they get, you know, you get, I don't know how many, like at least 5 in the 9 weeks that I was in boot camp, but probably more. 5 injections. Some of them were probably multi. And then right after boot camp, I went to another training, and I would go to the gym with a friend of mine every day and eat a can of tuna fish as our pre-workout. And I started having like lumps in my throat that became painful eating the tuna fish. I'd never had that before. And
and his mouth would get all tingly, like allergic symptoms.
Yeah.
I wonder if it was the mercury. Do you think it might have been the mercury?
It could be the mercury. And then, but it progressed, and I became allergic to some, not all, but some kinds of beer. And just these weird things. But I was just like, well, and then I found out later that in some beers, they put fish bladder as a stabilizer or something in some of these. So
Sorry.
I was like, yeah, maybe it's that. But it was just unexpected things. But I was like, it had to have something to do with them just tinkering with your immune system, just injecting you with things, getting you to react.
Well, and again, it makes sense. Like there's mercury. Mercury is found in fish, tuna. Yeah. That's normal. And if it's in the vaccine and it's eliciting an immune response, it makes total sense because, before that he was eating it all the time, no problems at all. But then he met me and we're like, just start eating it again. Just, little homeopathic doses. We'll give him little bits and now he can eat it again and he's fine.
I definitely don't recommend the average person do that, but because it could be quite dangerous if you go anaphylactic. But something shifted when I moved to this part of the world and I'm no longer allergic to fish anymore. We did have a smoked salmon that I was feeling a little bit weird with, but I've eaten fish, in large amounts many times since moving here, and not a single hint of reaction.
And again, that would open up a whole other can of worms if we were to go into the food industry and all the rubbish that's in foods these days. It's also eliciting all these, immune responses and whatever. But
it is possible to heal to some degree. I know it's controversial, especially when it comes to autism and stuff like that. But I know there are some homeopathic doctors that are doing things to help detox and
and I wanted to ask you, Meryl, because it's actually we get a lot of questions on our social media, especially a recent post that I put up that lots of people asking how to detox and how to detox their children. So again, for parents that have maybe vaccinated their kids or been vaccinated themselves, realize that it's probably not the best thing. They can see changes in their children. What are some of the ways they can detox and actually help to get their children's health back?
Well, I can't give medical advice. I'm not a practitioner, but I can tell you that I have seen hundreds of children recovered from things like autism, diabetes, children who were taking 2 injections of insulin a day and are now no longer even diagnosed with diabetes.
Wow.
So it is very possible. There are organizations in Australia, and I think they may be in the US too. There's something called the Mind Foundation, MINDD.org, and they have biomedical doctors that treat a whole range of conditions. And what I will say is that you will not find the answer to your child's problem in the allopathic system. There is a woman, you've probably seen her, Alexis, because she's been all over the internet. I think her name is Alexis, but I'm not sure now. She had a reaction to a vaccine when she was a young child, and she had a condition which is probably vaccine related, and she needed to get a treatment in hospital. She's in the US.
Oh, this was the recent story.
Yes,
This was horrendous. Yeah.
I know. So she went to the hospital to get treated, and the doctor refused to give her the treatment unless she took 3 vaccines. And she took 3 vaccines, and they almost killed her. She's lost all of her hair. Her body is covered in these purple, like blood blister things, and she's got a blood condition now because of that. And I think she had a blood condition to begin with, It's pretty horrendous. That was those 3 vaccines did that. Why did I start talking about this? We were right. So she was in the hospital. It's all come back to me. Yeah. She was in the hospital being treated for this. And I and many other people said, get out of there because they're going to kill you. And she was transferred to another hospital. A wonderful nurse came and took over her treatment, took her to the other hospital where they allowed her to have natural therapies as well as Western medical treatments. She couldn't see out of her eyes because they were swollen shut. Right now, she's lost every hair on her head, and her scalp is just covered in this blood blister thing. And she is so much better. Her skin on her face is clear. Her neck is almost clear. Her knees, like the bones were showing through her knees because it was just the skin was completely broken down, and she's using natural therapies, and she's getting treatment, and she's getting better. So what I recommend anyone who has a situation where they think they may have been harmed by vaccines, or they want to prevent the vaccines that they have taken themselves or that their children have taken from causing harm, is to find a good natural therapist or a holistic doctor who is very, very experienced in detoxing. Detoxing, you would know this, is not something you play around with. Because if you detox badly, you can make the situation so much worse. So find someone who is really experienced in this. And I know in the United States there are homeopathic and there's a holistic medical association in the US, I'm pretty sure. Pardon me. And so contact these associations and ask for a referral in your area. And do not let a doctor tell you that you can't detox, because you can. You definitely can, but you may not ever be able to detox fully. And that's why preventing it from going in is always better than trying to treat it after it's there. But you can treat it after it's there.
And I wanted to actually ask, did you do any of that for your son? Because did you stop? That was my other question I forgot to ask earlier. So your second, third, and fourth children, they're not vaccinated at all?
No, that's not the case. I was still more afraid of diseases than I was of the vaccine. So my son, who had the reactions, he got the first DPT and polio. And back then, the schedule was much less than it is now. So he got a DPT and polio, and then 2 DTs and polio. And then he got the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine when he was 18 months old, which was on schedule. I was 9 months pregnant with my second child, and he was in hospital for 3 or 4 days. 10 days later, they said he had gastroenteritis, but I know now that he had encephalitis. So after that, he developed symptoms of autism, toe walking, bad hand-eye coordination, lots and lots of things. My second child got DT and polio 3 times. My third child got polio 3 times. My fourth child is the only one who is completely unvaccinated, and she never saw a doctor. Wow. But, my own family is a double-blind study. Well, it's not really double-blind because I knew what they got. But the health between the first 2 and the second 2 is stark. The differences. And with my son who had these reactions, he had his tonsils removed before he turned 3 because his breathing was so bad. We thought he would suffocate at night in his sleep. And they took out his tonsils and it didn't do anything. He was still breathing really badly. If I knew now what I know then, I mean, the other way around. So, but we were lucky enough when he was 4 years old, he started at a Steiner preschool. And Steiner medicine is called anthroposophical medicine, and it is a combination of a lot of different natural therapies. And there was a great doctor from New Zealand who used to come out every 3 months, and he was an anthroposophical pediatrician. He was actually a pediatrician. I think he's still around. He was great. And he treated my son for his conditions, and it was the first time we'd seen improvements in him. And it really, I don't know if he would have been around if I hadn't managed to find this guy. Not only that, not long after that, maybe 5 or 6 years after, my son had failure to thrive. I think I might have mentioned that. He didn't really eat. He didn't gain weight. He weighed the same thing at 12 months and 24 months.
Wow.
He didn't gain weight at all. His growth was really stunted. But now, and starting about 5 years after that, a lot of children who had the same reaction as my son and stopped eating, they were forced by the medical doctors to have a gastrostomy, which is where they insert a button directly into your stomach and feed you through a tube into your stomach. It means that you can't eat any good food. It's like a formula stuff that's all full of chemicals, and that's what they feed you. And parents who refuse that lose custody of their children. There's one pediatrician in particular, not far from me, who was my son's pediatrician, and I thank God every day that we went to see him before he did this practice. He's reported so many people to the Department of Community Services because they've refused this procedure. And he is a serial reporter of these parents. And there are so many kids running around with these buttons in their stomachs because they weren't gaining weight according to schedule. And therefore, they had this surgery done. It is shocking. And it doesn't treat the condition. It doesn't treat why they're doing this in the first place, because they're sick. It hurts them to eat. Their bodies are not able to process food. So treat that condition, and then they start eating again. So,
yeah, it's terrible. I mean, and it's so clear to see. Like, it's one of those things, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because if you look at all of the complications, all of the side effects that are a result of vaccination and medical intervention, and then all they do is intervene again medically, and they're never ever treating the cause. Like, they're never ever treating the root cause. They're only ever treating the symptoms, and that's usually what's making people get sicker. And children are just they're starting off. And it's heartbreaking. Like, they're starting, like, that's setting the tone for their health for the rest of their life.
That's right. And that same Dr. Mendelsohn, who wrote that book, How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor, he had a quote from him that said, vaccinate a child once and you've got a customer for life. And that was the same thing. When I did stop vaccinating, I had a very close mothers group in Ballina when my kids were little. And when I stopped, like even my third child who only got the polio vaccine, I used to go to the mothers group. We met every month, every week. And all the parents there, constantly, their kids had green runny noses. They've just gotten over a course of antibiotics and they're going to start another one. And I remember one of the parents coming up to me and saying, Meryl, you're so lucky. Your son is never sick. And I said, it's not luck. It is not luck. We don't vaccinate. And and that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That is the exact situation. And parents who don't vaccinate find that their children are incredibly healthy for the most part. That is not to say, and that doesn't mean you don't get colds. It doesn't mean you don't get flus, but you get over it really quickly. My eldest child, when he would get a cold and all of his brothers and sisters would get a cold, they'd be over it in a day or two. He'd be sick for 2 or 3 weeks because their immune systems are destroyed, unfortunately.
Yeah, we found the same thing, and you hear it so often. Again, lots of people commenting on social media that have had that experience. They vaccinated their first child and then looked into it, stopped vaccinating, and their children's health is like it's like night and day. Same as with my family, and my mum stopped vaccinating me at around 4.5 years of age. So I didn't get all of them by any means, but the ones I did get definitely affected my immune system. And it was the same thing, like comparing my brother when he would get sick, a couple of days, still to this day, it's like a couple of days. If my brother's sick for a week, like he's really been hit hard, it rarely ever happens. But a few days, he gets a cold or a flu, it's over within a few days. Me growing up, I'm much better now. But again, I've done, because my mum detoxed me we did homeopathy. Yep. So I did that in my earlier years, like I was still in primary school. And then since then, actually, so at the beginning of last year, I actually, because I started learning more about all the heavy metal stuff, and I thought, maybe I should do a heavy metal detox. And I did hair analysis testing, and I was actually really low. And that, to me, I was kind of like, that homeopathic detox I did, even though it was years and years ago, really did the trick, because I had very, very low amounts of, I think it was a little bit of aluminium and a little bit of cadmium, and in all the chemicals they spray in the sky and everything. Like my homeopath actually said, she ordered the test and she actually said it'd be really unusual if you didn't have anything with all the toxins that we're exposed to. So, so we did that. But as a like growing up, all through, especially through adolescence, I think a lot of things can show up in adolescence because then the hormones are changing and the body's changing. And I remember when, like in high school, when I would get sick, without fail, almost every time I'd end up, like just from a cold or flu, I'd end up with a chest infection or a throat infection or a sinus infection. It would always get worse and I'd be sick for weeks. Where my brother got chicken pox, he got over it, never got it again. I'm pretty sure, Mum's not sure because she doesn't have my records, but I'm pretty sure I had the chicken pox vaccine. I got chicken pox as a child and then I got shingles as an adult, which they've linked. Well, shingles is like the dormant chicken pox virus or whatever they say.
It's the same virus. Yeah. It is the same virus according to what they say that causes it. And and there are children who are 3, 4, and 5 years old now getting shingles, which never used to happen. And invariably they're vaccinated against chickenpox. Because again, it exposes you to the infection, which you might never have been exposed to. I'm 66 years old. I've never had chickenpox. My kids all had chickenpox. I didn't get it. I've been exposed to it through my whole life. I didn't get it. We don't know enough about what immunity actually is to say why that's the condition. But it is very possible for someone to be immune to something without being able to test to show that they are immune. And we know also that when they test your blood and you show antibodies, that you can still get the infection because the antibodies do not mean that you're immune. And it's interesting. You mentioned earlier about the number of vaccines. Like, I constantly get people saying, well, I got vaccinated as a child and I'm perfectly fine. Yeah. And I'm like, how old are you? I might be 45, I might be 50. Well, you would have gotten less than 18 vaccines by the time you started school. A child today gets 72. Can you possibly compare what you had with what they had? People need to be aware that the schedule has changed. And on the AVN website, I think there is a table that shows the schedule in the 60s, the schedule in the 80s, and the schedule today. And it's like 60s, 80s, today. It's just, there's no comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a runaway train at this point. And at the same time that they're adding more and it's becoming more dangerous, they're getting more adamant about you can't even come here with that. You're going to have I know, COVID vaccines. I don't know if they started doing, reporting parents to the CPS if they don't vaccinate their kids and things like that. I know I have a friend that they moved from Minnesota because that was the case. They weren't going to go to the hospital. They weren't going to vaccinate. And in Minnesota, they were sending CPS to their house, the Child Protective Services, hinting at, threatening to take their children away, and so they moved to Wyoming, don't have that issue there.
Well, there was a case of that here in Australia. Like I know personally of someone that, Meryl, you this was the court case, right? Yeah, this was the court case where they were in foster care, wouldn't vaccinate for COVID, and then they were going to get taken away or whatever. What
Yes.
was that all about?
And that's not unusual. That's Mark Neugebauer. Sorry, his name is not that easy to pronounce. And he was one of the applicants in our case against the government to stop the mandates for COVID jabs. And he has children, and he also fosters children. And when you foster someone, I forget who it is. It's some official in the government is actually the owner, basically, of that child. You are just watching them for them. And he ordered that Mark's child be vaccinated, and Mark didn't want to. I'm not sure what the outcome is now, but Mark was an applicant in this case, which was incredibly brave of him because he wanted to protect this foster child. If you adopt a child or foster a child, the government tells you have to vaccinate them completely. And a lot of these kids were vaccine injured to begin with. We used to call our house the Underground Railroad because we had so many families come through here who were running away from the Australian version of, community services?
Child Protective Services.
Child Protective Services. There was a case with a family with 7 children, and they made the mistake. They were traveling in Queensland, and their youngest child, actually all their kids got chicken pox, but they thought that one of the pox on their youngest child's face was infected. So because they were traveling and they didn't really have a doctor there, they took her to the hospital. Big mistake. Never go to the hospital unless your child's at death's door. So they went to the hospital with their kids, and the doctor wanted to inject this child with antibiotics because he said that pox on their face was infected. And she said, well, can you give me a topical cream? I'm happy to use a topical cream. I just don't want her. They were completely unvaccinated, all these kids. I don't want her to get an injection of antibiotics. And the doctor said, if you don't do it, we are going to take your children away from you. I'm going out right now to call the Department of Community Services, which is the Australian version of CPS. And so as soon as the doctor and the nurse left the room, the parents gathered their children up, got in the car, and drove to my house at 4 a.m. And it turned out that, people murder people without this sort of a manhunt. The hospital got the license plate of their car, put out an Amber Alert for this couple. They crossed the border into New South Wales, so I don't know, they couldn't really do much here, but they did get in touch with the Department of Community Services in New South Wales, and they were in hiding in my house because otherwise the parents would have been arrested and their children would have been taken away from them. We had to negotiate. We had them go and see a doctor down here who wrote a report that the child was fine. And only after that would the Department of Community Services back off. But this family was on the books of the Department of Community Services for a decade or more. They had to have regular inspections to make sure their children were cared for.
That's absolutely absurd.
Yeah. And the irony of it is that, these like there's that, like you hear these stories of like, you know, Department of Community, they're not fit to be parents. But then you hear on the other side of like lots of parents that haven't vaccinated their children and they say that when parents are vaccinating their children, that's child abuse. You know what I mean? It's like the irony of it is, and obviously I would never say that someone that's vaccinated their children is abusing their child, because they don't know, you know, in most cases they don't know any better. But it's just the irony of it is absurd. And again, it comes back to like, this is what the medical industry does. They gaslight, you know, they always turn it around on the parent when they're actually doing the right thing. And it's always turned back on them that they're the ones doing the wrong thing.
Yep. And sadly, the Department of Community Services, and I'm not sure if it's the same in the U.S., Isaac, with CPS, there was actually an inquiry in New South Wales Parliament a few years ago about this, because the Department of Community Services loses tens of thousands of children that are put under their care. They're never seen again. So, you know, anything you can do to stay away from the Department of Community Services, do that as well.
Yeah, it's a dark world. The child abuse, child molestation in the CPS in the United States is scary high. And it just shows you the names of these organizations. I've observed this for a while. Since Obama, when I first started realizing it, when they created the Affordable Care Act for the healthcare, and it made it more expensive. They name things the opposite of what they're actually intended for. And I do believe it's intent. I don't have the proof for it, but it just is the pattern that shows up, that just keeps showing up. It's not a coincidence. Child Protective Services isn't protecting children from anything. You know, there are cases where there's child abuse, but I know of people where there's child abuse happening. A friend in Ireland right now that's going through that, where there's active child abuse happening is with a spouse, and he reports her, nothing happens. They ignore him. You know, he's trying to get help. He's trying to protect his children, doing it the legal way, and it's not there to help you. It's there to push one side of an agenda, and that, you know, can be pretty dark. Same thing with the Food and Drug Administration. You know, why do you think they call it Food and Drug Administration? Like, it's just,
Absolutely. I think you're right with that. I agree with you 100%. It's always the opposite. And if you do the opposite of what these authorities tell you, you will almost always be right. I have never met, and I've spoken with thousands of families over the years, I have never met one family who chose not to vaccinate who regretted that decision. But I have met thousands of families, and this is well before COVID, thousands of families who deeply regret choosing to vaccinate themselves or their child.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you, Meryl, because you've been in this game for so long, because obviously we saw in the last 4 years, like, it was, to be honest, it was arguably one of the best things to happen, COVID, because it woke so many people up, if not to the greater you know, miscomings in the world, but at least like what goes on in the medical institutions and the medical industry. So when you look back sort of pre-COVID, if you were to separate it out between pre-COVID and post-COVID, what are like the main differences you've seen, especially because when you toured with the Vaxxed bus, you toured before COVID, right?
Well, we toured right at the beginning, during lockdown, before the vaccine came out. We started touring during lockdowns, and which was a trip and a half, and then during COVID. And so I don't have a really pre-COVID to compare to, but I have 30 years or 26 years before that to compare to. I know that every vaccine has caused incredible death and disability. And Gardasil, when Gardasil came out, I thought there could never be a vaccine worse than that, because the reactions that were being reported to us were so horrendous that I thought it was terrible. But when COVID came out, the reactions, first of all, went through the roof. We never had the demand on our services that we had after COVID started. We were getting calls day and night, literally, and emails. But the the difference I see with COVID is before COVID, when we would do seminars or talk to people or put articles in the paper, the only people who would respond would be the people who were already converted. So we were always preaching to the converted, preaching to the choir. After COVID, and especially after the vaccination, the so-called vaccination started, for the first time that I've ever seen, we were getting more people who had never questioned anything about medicine before contacting us and questioning it. It woke the masses. It really and truly did. And when the government says that there are 10% of the people in Australia who currently question the safety and effectiveness of vaccinations, I'd say multiply that by 5, because I think at least 50% of the people are questioning now. And I'm saying this from talking to people, from getting out into the community and seeing them. There is still half the population that's sound asleep, but I think half of them are, if not fully awake, at least partially awake to what's been done. And I see that now because the whole narrative has started again. It's, we're going to have to start masking. We've got bird flu. We're going to have to kill the chickens. People are going to have to register their chickens, all of this stuff. Yeah. And I see people making comments on these articles, and they turn the comments off because after a while, it is one person after another. Fool me once, don't fool me again, F off, that kind of thing. Every single comment is like that. People are not going to stand for it, and I think it's scared the bejesus out of the government, the fact that they have lost that control. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see it on our socials, just the amount of people. I mean, and don't get me wrong, you still get people arguing. And it's really interesting when you see the ones that are pro-vax. It's always the same narrative. It's so clear that it's brainwashing because they always bring up the exact same points. Whereas all the people that are quote unquote anti-vax, there's so many different threads that they can pull because they're actually thinking outside the box. Like and again, most of them have been through their own experiences with usually vaccinating one child, seeing how sick they got, or, they've ended up autistic, and then not vaccinating their other children and seeing the difference. And because really when it comes to experience, and again, this is what we were talking about before with, doctors will gaslight and say, oh, but you're not a medical professional. You don't know science. You can see when you vaccinate one child and you don't vaccinate another child, you can see in front of your eyes the difference. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the best example of that gaslighting and its effects is Tasha David. I don't know if you know Tasha. She was the president of the AVN for a couple of years. Most beautiful person I have ever known in my entire life. And she's been through hell in her life. She's the mother of 8 children. And her husband died in front of her when she was 40, in front of her and all her children. He had a massive heart attack and died, left her with 8 kids. And 6 of her 8 children are various levels of vaccine injured. 3 of them are severely autistic. And she was gaslit by the doctors. And she continued to vaccinate. And finally, with her youngest 2, she did not vaccinate them at all. And they are the only children without any health problems. And just a couple of weeks ago, one of her daughters, who was fully vaccinated as a child, sadly passed away from cancer. And I don't think that child would have had cancer if it wasn't for the vaccines. I can't swear to that. I don't know. But if anybody did not deserve that, Tasha did not deserve that, and her daughter didn't deserve it. But there are so many families out there who don't deserve what vaccines do to them. And I live for the day. Like, I have fought for decades to say I am not anti-vaccine, because in my definition of anti-vaccine, it is telling you what to do. And I don't want to tell you what to do. You are an adult. You are responsible to make your own decisions for your children. The only thing that I want to see happen is that you get information and make an informed choice. Don't just do what someone's telling you. To me, anti-vaccine was the opposite. It was saying nobody should have access to vaccines even if they want them. You want them, you have them. Go ahead, you can have mine too. So... But with COVID, they changed the definition of anti-vaccine. They also changed the definition of vaccine. Before COVID, a vaccine was something that was an injection or a treatment that was given to prevent an infection. That was the definition of a vaccine. After COVID, it was an injection oh God, I can't remember the exact definition, but it didn't even mention protection from infectious diseases. But the definition of anti-vaccine was changed to someone who opposes mandatory vaccination. If you oppose mandatory vaccination, then you are considered anti-vaccine.
Right.
Hello, I am anti-vaccine.
Yeah, that's like mum. Yeah, that's like mum. She always says, she's so funny. She goes, people, because and again, they do this kind of stuff out in the so that people, I'm not anti-vax, and a lot of people that started questioning the COVID, I'm not anti-vax, I'm just questioning the COVID vaccine, and my mum, my mum. They think I'm anti-vax. I bloody oath I'm anti-vax. Like she wears it proudly.
I love her.
Yeah, she wears it proudly. She's like, yeah. She's like, no, I proudly am. Yeah, vaccines should not be a part of our lives, and unfortunately they are. But like you said, if people want to have them, by all means. But you should be doing your research, instead of just blindly trusting, medical professionals, the government, because obviously they're very, very much intertwined. And the reason that they push so hard is because of the government involvement as well. And it's such a tangled web, like for people that start researching this stuff and looking into it. It's very messy.
And the good thing about COVID also, aside from making people question vaccination is a journey. I know with me, once I started questioning vaccination, it started opening doors to question other things. I started questioning nutrition. We changed our diet completely after COVID. I was giving my eldest son the fluoride pills that I would get from the council. I don't know if they still do that because there's no fluoride in the water here, or at that point there wasn't. There is now, and then I started questioning fluoride and did all of that. And I started questioning drugs, antibiotics, all of these things. It becomes a continuum. You start at one end of it and you start moving down there. And I see that with people who started questioning because of COVID jabs, that they are now questioning other things. They're questioning the chemtrails. They're questioning, why is this going on? They're questioning everything. Why is there poison in our food? I saw an interview with someone who is gluten intolerant. He said he was gluten intolerant since he was a kid. He went to Italy and he ate pizza, and it was like the first gluten he'd had in decades. And he said, I had no reaction at all. I went back to the US, I had pizza, I was sick as a dog. He said, it is not the wheat, it is what they've done to it.
Absolutely.
And people are starting to realize that our governments and their agencies that are there to supposedly protect us are actually poisoning us. They are killing us. And it is democide, a word that I never heard until COVID. And it basically means murder by government. And that is what we are seeing. We are seeing democide on a mass level. And there are very few countries in the world that aren't involved in this. El Salvador is one where I would move tomorrow if my kids would go there too, because their new president is brilliant and he is kicking all of these people out. I hope he's protected, because the governments in Africa that didn't want the jab, their leaders were all killed. There were like 7 of them, and they were all killed. And leaders who would be compliant to the World Health Organization came in and they took the vaccine. But Africa, only 4% of Africans vaccinated, and they had almost no deaths and no serious problems with COVID during the entire time.
It's great. Good for them.
Funny that.
I know.
I love it.
Makes you wonder.
Yeah. And I think, and that's why I say, like, that was, I mean, for me personally, like, COVID was the best thing that could have ever happened, because that's what happened for me. Like, we obviously already knew, like, we were never going to take the COVID jab. Like, we were already against that, but it made me question so many other things, especially to do with, the things that our government does. I mean, look, I'd studied nutrition and knew the stuff about the food, but when you actually look at the extent of it, like, there's no other way to put it. They're literally trying to poison people and kill them, and also have lifelong customers in the medical industry. It always often comes back to that also.
That's right. That's right. It is an agenda. And anyone who says, oh, no, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, every single conspiracy theory has been proved right. So, saying it's a conspiracy just makes me think I really need to look into this. That's all it does. And it should make any thinking person consider that too. It doesn't mean that it's true, but it means that it's something you should be looking at.
Yeah. People need to ask questions and stop giving so much of a damn as what people think when you ask a question.
Absolutely.
If it makes them uncomfortable and ruffles some feathers, they'll be okay. They'll survive that,
That's it. And at my age, I grew up at a time where it wasn't a problem to make someone feel a bit uncomfortable, to make them feel that, wait a minute, maybe I need to think about this. Right now, people have become such terrible snowflakes. You're afraid of insulting them all the time. I said 20 years ago, I said, political correctness will be the death of us all. And I can see that now. It's true. I never want to hurt anyone's feelings. I never want to make anyone feel bad. But sometimes, in order to inform them, you need to make them think. And sometimes thinking is pretty uncomfortable, but you need to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we had that recently after Alexa's surgery, and I'm still like, well, antibiotics are probably a good idea because your body was open to all the doctors breathing in it and all this other stuff.
So just for anyone listening, because we're going to record an episode, I'll tell my whole story, and Meryl, that I had breast implants for almost 8 years and then I had them removed, and we came out of the hospital and I had my prescriptions of drugs, and I just looked through them and I was like,
dump them in the trash.
I was like, I'm not taking antibiotics. I just was like, nah, because I took the painkillers and because I was already on so much medication, I was just like, yeah, I'm not taking the antibiotics. And he kind of freaked out a bit. And I get, it was a huge surgery, so he just wanted to make sure, I didn't get infected and all this stuff.
I know how dirty hospitals are as well, but I also didn't quite have faith in some of the other things. But that was also part of not trusting myself and my intuition. And then Alexa and her mom, we were kind of talking about it, and I was being triggered and I was, losing. And then I was like, okay, we'll do Manuka honey, colloidal silver.
I was taking homeopathics because that was the thing too.
Absolutely the best thing.
Yeah, I wasn't like, I'm just not going to take them and do nothing. Like I was taking homeopathics, and we've used homeopathy almost my whole life. So I have full faith in homeopathy. Like I know that it works. Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like we're so conditioned societally, we're so conditioned to not trust ourselves, to not trust our intuition, and to not trust our own body. Like we have this God-given body that if you cut yourself, it will heal. We're self-healing. We have that ability. Yep. And we're so conditioned out of that knowing and out of that trust, so that we can give all of our power away to the medical industry to look after our health. And they do not have our best interests at heart.
100% correct. And I think that keeping people in a state of fear, constant fear, is the only way they control people. So, the thing to do is to avoid that fear situation and try to think of things logically. And we're not trained to do that in school. We're taught to obey by rote learning and just, not think, just learn. And doctors especially, they're just taught to learn, and they're very intelligent generally, and they've learned a lot of stuff, but they don't really think about it. And if you think about the things they've been taught, none of it makes logical sense. None of it.
That's right.
When you got cancer, you're going to treat it with poison that would kill people. How does that make sense? What causes cancer in the first place? How do people get cancer? Why do all of us have cancer in our bodies, but we're not sick with it? And only certain people get sick with it. Why do 10 people out of 100, if you test their nose and throat, have meningococcal, pneumococcal, or Hib bacteria in their nose and throat, and yet they're not sick? Why does that happen? It's because we have an immune system. We have a balance, a very delicate balance that is keeping us well. And it is only when that balance becomes tilted that things happen. So how do we bring things back into balance? That's the question that needs to be asked. And doctors don't even ask that question because they don't understand it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is, that's why we started this podcast together, because we really want to, it's all about the people that we have on it. It's really all about coming back to who we really are, and that's it's such a broad, thing to explore. And because there's so many different aspects of it, physical health is just one of them. Your mental health, I think, is so much more important, because it's your perception of the world really shapes your reality. And if you're constantly in fear and stress and, oh my God, like if I don't take this vaccine, I'm going to get a virus. And we don't believe in viruses. That's a whole other topic.
Yeah,
and we'll probably have, we're hoping to get Alex Zek on to do his presentation on virology and, how it's a complete, he's amazing, and how it's a complete sham. Because coming back to who we are, like I said, we're these self-healing, we have these amazing bodies, and we are such powerful beings. And again, they don't want us to know that. They want to diminish that so that they can have full control over us.
Exactly. And there's a spiritual aspect to it too, which I've only just started to understand myself. Your mom's been in this for ages, but I'm a newcomer to that. And I believe that it's, physical health is spiritual, and mental, and also physical. The three work together, and you get nothing without the three of them working together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So what have you got going on at the moment, Meryl? Because I know obviously you retired from the AVN, which was, I think lots of people were sad, but lots of people Mum was like, finally, she needs to take a break.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very happy that the AVN is in excellent hands. They've got a great committee, a wonderful president who I've known for such a long time.
I know. Anita's amazing.
She really is. So, I am working on my Substack, and I have been very negligent with my Substack because I've started a business also. And if I could add another 12 hours to the day, I would be so happy.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir here. I agree.
I know. It's crazy. Every day I say I've got to, because there's so much happening and I really want to write about it, but things take over and I don't have a chance to do it, but I am going to. So I'm working on the Substack. And I would love to get back on the Vax bus and take it back on the road and get out to South Australia and West Australia, where we haven't been yet, and to the center. That would be fantastic. And Darwin, if we could get up there. So, I just think that the message needs to get out further. And the Vax bus is such a big sign of that message, when it goes out and it says we are not government property. I just think people need to be thinking, no, we're not government property. We are individual human beings, free men and free women. And, we are able and capable of making these decisions ourselves. So, I just think that I'm not going to stop working on this issue anytime soon, but I just think that it's something that is taking on a life of its own now and not before time. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Meryl. You are such a trailblazer. You've been a family friend of ours for almost 30 years, and we just,
Crazy.
I know, and we just adore you and the work that you do. And like you said, it's like you started this, 30 years not knowing where it was going to go. And like you said, it's taken on a life of its own now. And I think, I think you really laid the foundation, at least here in Australia, for that and for the work that the AVN does and all these other new groups that have now popped up in the last, 4 years or so.
Yes.
So thank you so much. And thank you so much for coming on and joining us. It was such a great chat.
Thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed it too. I appreciate it. All right. Take care.
Thanks, Meryl. And we'll pop all of your links in the show notes to your Substack and Under the Wire. And we'll pop the AVN website in there too, where people can find more information.
Fantastic. That's great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Meryl.
Yes. Thank you so much. Meryl is such a freaking legend. Love that woman.
She is. I love her to death. She's awesome.
Yeah, that was such a good episode. There was a lot of information covered, and it's hard because after 30 years plus of doing all this, she's at the point now where she, and us too, we'll just say where we're at now. But for those that are still kind of stepping into the idea that vaccines are not the best option, not the best thing to do to their body or their kids, that could be a lot. It can be full on. It can be shocking, but I hope that information came across with love and the intention that it was put out in, which is, we care about our audience. We care about the people that listen to this show and their kids. And it's really important that the truth is shared. So.
And just remember, guys, the vast majority of people that are labeled quote unquote anti-vax, they all vaccinated at some point.
Yeah.
The vast majority, I would say 90 to 95% of people started by vaccinating, and their kids got really unwell, they got really unwell. And that's what made them start researching. So it's not like people are just like, that just doesn't work for no reason. Like it's not like that. Yeah. So,
and there's 1% of those people that were like me that developed an allergy to beer. Now we're out in the streets with our protest signs. Vaccines killed my buzz.
I don't think I've ever seen one of those signs at a protest before, but
for the average people,
it's the first for everything.
We step into it in different ways. We all come to the truth in our own unique ways.
Anyway, so for anyone that's interested in doing any further research, we do have some links in the show notes. Some of the graphs that Meryl referred to, there's some links to those graphs. Otherwise, just head to the AVN's link tree. They've got their website there. They've got, you can follow them on socials. There's a ton of free resources on their website. There's a whole community of people that are always willing to help and support. So definitely do that through the AVN.
If you enjoyed this episode, found the information helpful, encouraging, enlightening, inspirational, please share this with friends and family. You can support the show as well by giving us a positive rating and review if you're on a podcast app like Apple iTunes or Spotify. And drop us a good comment online if you're watching us on Rumble or YouTube.
Mm-hmm. And if anyone listening has any questions about anything that we talked about, just, flick us a message on our socials or wherever you're listening. You can comment on wherever you're watching or listening and just ask us, because we probably will be able to provide an answer, or at least point you in the right direction. So feel free to reach out to us as well.
Yeah. All right.
And before we head off, I did just want to address, guys, I made up a word in this interview. I said the word miscomings. I think I meant to say shortcomings, and I realized after the interview was done, I was like, is miscomings a word? And everyone was like, no. And I was like, I think I meant to say shortcomings, but I don't know where I got miss from. So I maybe had another word in mind that I was going to say. But here at Natural AF, we're all about being natural AF, and sometimes we make up words. So get used to it.
It's called the Australian language. It's just a never-ending list of made-up words.
Thanks for listening, guys. We can't wait to see you on the next episode. Bye.